So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here today. Before I jump into the subject and try to introduce what is in front of us over the next 30 minutes, I would like to thank Steffi and her team for bringing together all this, what we are having here today, the program, the people, and everything else. Thanks a lot. I would like to thank our hosts from Bavaria, giving us a small place that feels like home in the meantime, and opening doors for us and hosting us so nicely in this wonderful day. Thanks a lot. To all who are contributing or about to contribute, you are really making the difference. I would like to thank all of you, the guests, because in my hometown in the Rhinelands, in the German part of the Rhinelands, we are saying that the guests are in charge, that they are responsible for the weather. So thanks for doing this. Yesterday we have been sitting in Bavaria and praying that the rain will go away and that we would have that weather and have a wonderful evening on the terrace later on in the evening. And you did it. Thanks for making such a difference. Steffi volunteered me a while ago to give a little introduction into the first presentation that we are seeing today. And the matter of the fact is that for some time we observe what's going on in certain areas online, and more we come to questions where we find it very hard to get the real and the right answer. One of the questions that I would like to share with you, if this would work, is the question is, why do we allow some internet companies? Why don't you allow me? Now it's a real now? The final now? Okay, here we are. So why do we allow some internet companies to create complete personal profiles, and I mean really complete, about all of us, and to keep them, analyze them, and use them basically without any limitation? And when I'm saying detail, I mean really detail. So that was a one-off, so it worked once, and is it karaoke? No? Here we are. So what do I mean by profile? Time is stored when you do something. Location and places that you visit, floors, rooms, transport media, devices, question you ever asked online, content you consumed, products you viewed, and so on and so forth. Basically, as life has changed in the meantime, so that all we do is mirrored somehow in the digital world, basically everything is stored and is put into profiles so that all of us are completely transparent, at least to a handful of people. And if you look into the latest developments, and again, I try to share it with you on a slide, why do we allow connected devices? And more of our devices became connected without our knowing. And communication apps like Alexa, Siri, WhatsApp, to store, analyze, and use all our communication, I mean even the oral communication, for unknown purposes and without any limitation. And if I am allowed to share a case example, WhatsApp seems to be a data vacuum cleaner. So they basically store everything from location, time, device information, all kinds of. All your contacts, they know all your friends, and know all the content of conversation and store the real content of your communication, of your conversation forever. All your links and pictures and all the attachments. And Tim Cook, he is making a point that we at Apple, he has been saying, believe privacy is a fundamental human right. Is now saying that Siri will be only analyzed by people who are fully paid by Apple, so it will not send to some third parties who do the analysis. And he will find a way to give you an option that you are not analyzed. Happy to find people who are able to exercise that option. So what is the common answer that we are getting if we discuss this in any public space, be it with politicians, be it with legal people, or with friends? The first answer always is people don't care. Especially the young ones don't care. And if you have a more elaborate discussion later on, what is said is users understand exactly what happens to their data, and they agree voluntarily. So we thought we shouldn't forever discuss about these facts or about these things without knowing the facts. And a while ago, we asked Allensbach Institute to find out the facts for us, because that is all speculation. I'm very happy that Anne Niedermann today is with us to present the findings and the clear facts that she found out in a representative study in Germany a couple of months ago. Thanks for introducing Mrs. Niedermann.
Good morning, everyone. Hard facts. Let's dive into survey results. We were actually thrilled when Focus and Border approached us to do a study on how is the user perspective on these consent situations. You know, the popping up of this window, asking you to read through a lot of text and to consent how your personal data is stored. We all know these situations. And I at first thought, well, there must be a huge amount of studies already existing. And when we dived into scientific literature and the actual studies, we found out there's hardly anything. There are only bits from one country or the other country, but there's missing a comprehensive study. And what we liked about the approach we were able to do is that we agreed immediately on how we would like to execute this study, to conduct it. We wanted to do a big one, a big study, lots of respondents for good data quality, no compromise in the sample selection, best method available, and we were able to do that. Thank you very much for that thorough approach. Today, I would like to share with you the highlights. This is one of the pop-up windows everyone knows. We had two objectives in this study. We wanted to find out how do users judge the comprehensibility and the readability of the text. Do they read it at all? Or in what situations do they read it? Or in what situations don't they read it? What do they actually understand what this text means? How do they handle it? What emotions go with it? And then we wanted to find out in which situation they would consent, why they would consent, and why not. At first, my hypothesis was the problem is all about understandability. It's all about the individual ability to really understand the text. I learned better. Let's dive into how the users actually deal with online services, with internet services. We all know that internet usage has grown tremendously over the last years, and there is a set of internet data services which is used by everyone. About 7 on average per person. It's a little less of this set for younger people. And we had the chance in this study to start from 14 years of age in this study, not the normal 16 or 18 years in a survey, but from 14 years of age, so we also could look at the very young age group, 14 and 50 years old. Please concentrate on the top of this chart. I highlighted every single internet service which is used by more than 2/3 of the respondents in orange, and you see that there is a set of, let's say, 3 or 4 big ones. That is Google, WhatsApp, YouTube, and Google Maps insofar, and also a little Amazon, which are which is used by normally everyone. Among the youngest age group, 14 and 15-year-olds, it's 99% with Google search engine, it's 98% with WhatsApp, and this is in the total population, 59% and 85% respectively. We see that the set is getting a little smaller with more age. It's in a more narrow spectrum of use. 2 services are in particular classified by the users themselves as indispensable, absolutely essential for them. By about half of the users say this is the Google search engine. They can't live without it. 2/3 of the users aged 14 to 29 say the same. And nearly the same applies to WhatsApp. 46% say, I can't live without it. It's absolutely essential for me. And 67% of the youngest ones. Users like the services because they give them a lot of gratifications. Why do they like them? They help them to maintain their social context. This is the very first gratification. They offer a high level of service for no charge. They're free. They allow the users to adapt these services to their personal interests and needs. And among the users aged 14 to 29, the communication function, to be able to really keep in contact with the others, is predominant. If you look at this from an antitrust perspective, if you would ask these users who use internet services and said it's indispensable for me, if they would accept a substitute for that service, they certainly would decline it. So the market for them is one market participants. The number of market participants is one only. We can distinguish 3 types of users. The main number of respondents falls into the middle category, which is 52%, about half of the respondents. They say, I'm critical when it comes to storing the services, collecting my data and storing this data about me, but because I want to use these services, they are important to me, indispensable, I just accept it. So they're critical, but they nevertheless accept it. That's a majority. 33% fall into the category who say, well, I'm so critical, I really check it out. I have serious concerns, and I try to disclose not my data, and I would refrain from using certain services if I find out that they use the data in a way I don't like it. I think this is overstating reality a little, because it's socially accepted to have that most rational position. So I would, subtract a substantial portion of that. 12% fall in the careless category. They say, well, I have no problem with storage of my data at all. The service is collecting data about me. I'm confident that the law protects me. And if you look specifically at the youngest, you will find out that this number among youngest is 33%. So the most vulnerable group, the youngest ones, have the most confidence in data protection is done by the law, and I don't have to really look into it. I'm protected. I can do what I want. We asked the users, the last time you had popping up such a window asking for your consent on the storage of personal data and everything around it, what did you do? So we get an average picture. You ask for the last time, you find out the average. And we find out that more than 77%, in fact, exactly, of the population can be classified as passive. The last time they had consented. They consented nevertheless. 31% admitted that they never read anything detailed in these consent texts they were offered. But they didn't even open them. They just, accepted that without any look at the detail. 46% said, well, yes, I skimmed over the details. In the end, I accepted, but I looked at some conditions, and the only ones we can qualify as active is only 22%. That's less than one quarter of the respondents. What is actively? Actively means that you read through the conditions. Well, it's only 9% of all respondents who stated this. I read that thoroughly. 9% of 100% of users only stated last time I read it. The other ones were changing some settings, or perhaps opened an information window, an information link to getting more information, but only 9% read it. What struck me most in this survey was how many negative emotions these consent situations arise. There's widespread suspicions that the companies intentionally write the texts incomprehensible, and that people are angry about that. 59% say though. And we say that even the 14 and 15 years old, the very youngest, also are annoyed with that, 45%. It gets on their nerves that these conditions are updated constantly and they are asked again and again to accept conditions, and they just give up. They say, I don't read it anymore. It's so frequent, I just don't want it. 53%, majority. And among the youngest, same reaction. In the end, they come out with an overall uneasy feeling, some suspicion. And I think it's not in the interest of the internet service companies to raise such negative emotions. Let's come to the key point. 77% of all the internet services users who have knowingly accepted conditions in the past tell us there's no point in reading the conditions because I have to accept them anyway if I want to use the service. They have learned that for the services which they themselves feel they are indispensable for them, they have no choice. And this is even the same reaction among those who have behaved passively in these situations and for the young ones as well. The next striking point is that 73%, which is nearly more than three quarters, nearly 4/5, tell, for me, it's too difficult to read online the text to be able to handle them online. And I think these two statements make clear what actually happens. Predominantly is just an acceptance right on the spot without reflection. We asked them to rate overall the comprehensibility of the texts, and it turns out as you would expect. People predominantly say 52%, it's incomprehensible, very incomprehensible, a fifth, 20%. Only 26% say, okay, fairly good. And then we gave them bits, selected bits from the texts to actually read it and to judge them in terms of comprehensibility and to find out what do they gather from that. What information, what sense they make out of this. And at first I thought that must be a disaster, yeah? If you look at these results, you will find out that the people don't understand it at all, and I was wrong. What we found actually was that the comprehensibility issue is not as big as we thought. If the people actually are helped to read the text by giving them, well, it's in a kind of more easy a task than online, in reading during a survey on a paper, selected bits, they have quite a good understanding. It's an okay understanding, and it doesn't differ so much with individual ability or education. So the problem must be somewhere else. We asked the respondents, if you have a choice on these conditions you just read through, you just judged in terms of comprehensibility, would you accept this very statement? Would you accept this clause? And we found that a lot of clauses, this is the example of a WhatsApp text, are rejected, in fact, if they had the choice. 71% say, I don't want that my data is transferred to other countries than the country I'm living in, for example, the United States or other third countries. 71%. And the same reaction among the youngest group. They see it about in this same level critical. 64%, which is nearly 2/3, say, I don't want to give this WhatsApp the telephone numbers from my mobile phone directory. 58%, again, the majority said, I would never agree if I had the choice that other companies than WhatsApp, WhatsApp receives information and data from from the user from other companies, and your phone number and your name and your other information is, processed into one data file. This is the main problems. We have another example here from the Facebook users. 54% say, I would never consent to data transfer to other companies and partners of Facebook. And we don't want the surveys to even share the data among themselves, among partner companies within the same framework, 37%. The data storage is not so much the problem. The problem is the data is given away to other partners which we don't know. So in the end, it boils down to the problem. If I have learned by now as a user, as they have learned, that I have no choice, that I have to accept it all, or it can't use the service, I don't bother to read the text. It's a fiction that there is an informed and freely found consent. It's a situation where the user thinks we have no choice. And it's a purely rational decision for them to say, well, I don't bother. I can't influence it. I can't select. I can't, vote against clauses which I don't like. So I think that the key point is to learn, if we want to improve the situation, it's not the point, well, I welcome every effort to make texts more readable, more comprehensible, but the main point will be give them a choice at all. And then they are able to understand and read the text and make their choice. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dear Mrs. Czerny, dear Mr. Kallen, first of all, thank you very much for the kind invitation and introduction, as well as the opportunity to talk to you today. Dear ladies and gentlemen, my task is to shed at least some light at the legal perspective, and please don't you worry, I have only about 10 minutes, so even if you don't want to shed more of your time. I will talk about the connection between data privacy and market power. And as we have heard from Mrs. Niedermann, some say they can't live without some internet services. So from a legal point of view, we are talking about competition law or antitrust law, not technically speaking, but then we are talking about essential facilities and maybe an abuse of a dominant position when it comes to the terms of condition. And I will try to focus on what implications that will have for the application and the enforcement of data law, of data privacy law. Private power requires legal framing. And in order to tackle private data power, the focus these days is very much on antitrust law and on data protection law. In this context, antitrust law on both sides of the Atlantic is seen as a possible response to the ever-growing market power of big tech companies. In the European Union as well as in the United States, this finding is underlined by investigations against Amazon, Facebook, Google. And these days, for instance, the German Federal Cartel Office has started a proceeding against Facebook because of the company's processing of user data. To be fair, last week there was a ruling from the High Court of Düsseldorf against this, against the findings of the German Federal Cartel Office. Personal data, within the meaning of the GDPR, has become a major driver of the digital economy. The new European Union data protection law, therefore, is an important instrument to regulate digital business models and markets. The GDPR was and is promoted as an instrument to challenge internet giants. Not the main focus, but it's one instrument to challenge internet giants. However, against this background, my speech mainly addresses two questions. What effect does the existence of market power have in data protection law? And most importantly, what does it mean for the voluntariness, the freely given consent of the user? First of all, it is important to mention that market power as such is not explicitly addressed in the GDPR. The market position of a data controller is not decisive for the scope for the application of data protection law. Rather, the only substantive legal starting point of the GDPR is the processing of personal data. But nevertheless, a dominant position of the data controller can have an effect by means of interpretation of specific provisions within the GDPR. This applies in particular to the question whether consent is freely given. So that is the element of voluntariness. Voluntariness, I would say, can be impaired or even eliminated by the existence of market power. All of us, you know that freely given consent by the data subject may constitute the legal basis for the lawful processing of personal data. Consent is based on the model of a sovereign person who freely and fully informed consents to the processing of his or her personal data. In this sense, consent is regarded as an elementary and indispensable element for the realization of individual self-determination. Nowadays, the element freely given, which is required for an effective consent, is subject to serious concerns. Behavioral economic studies suggest that the existence of an information overload or maybe even an information overkill may exist. Reasons for this, we have heard about it from Mrs. Niedermann, are too long, non-transparent consent declarations, poor comprehensibility, and the sheer mass of declarations of consent, constantly required. In addition, the majority of users, or a majority of users, are likely to have a rational apathy towards declarations of consent. That is a privacy paradoxon. Finally, and now we come to the field of antitrust law, there are distinct information asymmetries, and there exists a strong market power on many markets, in particular on online platform markets. With that in mind, the question must be raised whether it is still possible to speak of voluntariness in the context of consent to data processing. Due to the often subjectively perceived or maybe in reality existing lack of alternatives, you have mentioned that before, the granting of consent for a large number of services unfolds indications of serious restrictions. In view of the current representative market study, the impressive marketing study done by Allensbach Institute that has been just presented to us, there are considerable doubts about voluntariness, especially in constellations of market power. In legal practice, it is and will be essential to include a dominant position of a data controller in the application and interpretation of different data protection law regulations. A decisive criterion in this respect is the existence of a dominant position in the course of the examination of the element of voluntariness and maybe in favor of involuntariness of the consent given. The consideration of dominant market positions thus leads to a limitation of the central element of consent, the element of freely given. In regard of consent may be lacking in particular if substantial, this is in particular if substantial network and login effects exist next to a monopoly decision. Such effects occur above all in social networks. After all, there are good reasons, also and especially in view of the Allensbach study, to doubt the voluntary nature and thus the existence of a legally valid consent, for example, to the Facebook terms of use and others, because of a dominant market position. All of us, we know the digital economy is increasingly dependent on data processing, which is why data protection law is logically developing into a regulatory framework for the competition within the digital data economy. And it's a global competition on data protection law. We've heard from Mr. Klaus today that we are not alone on this planet when it comes to data protection law. We have very different legal systems all around the world. In the EU, we have the principle of it is forbidden unless you have a permission or a balance of interest. When it comes to the US, there's a harms-based approach. It is allowed as long as there occurs no harm. And we've heard about China today. And in China, we've learned there is no rule at all. And we have a social scoring system in place. So I think from a global perspective, we have to keep in mind that we should not have a race to the bottom, and we should promote the European model of data privacy. Because data protection law sets limits to the lawful processing of personal data based upon users' consent. And this shapes entire business models and strategies with effects also on the supra-individual welfare. By setting substantial and effective limits on companies dominating markets, data protection law conversely assigns a competitive advantage to non-dominant companies. This is because non-dominant companies are legally allowed to collect personal data on a comparatively larger scale on the basis of consent. This opens far-reaching opportunities which in turn can counteract monopolization tendencies in data-driven markets. Consequently, modern data protection law cannot only provide a legal framework for private legal relationships in the digital economy, but can also indirectly promote fairness in the digital economy as a whole. This may lead to substantial fines for breaches of the GDPR, and above all, it may lead to a change in the respective business practices. Such a development towards the use of more user-friendly data protection conditions, terms of condition, and the protection of voluntariness in the privacy context would be very welcome to look at the details and the whole picture. In order to protect users effectively, data protection law, and this is a central argument of my speech, must be consistently applied and rigidly enforced by data protection authorities and courts. Overall, and that brings me to the end of my presentation, what is needed is a continuous and multidisciplinary debate on data protection law and data protection law enforcement in the age of big tech, and we'll listen to talks this afternoon, and to artificial intelligence issues. Under such conditions, there's good reason for the overall theme of this conference, good reason for optimism and courage. And thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thanks a lot for the invitation and the possibility also to comment some of these, what we have already seen and heard. At first, I would like to say something, kind of a sentence where I would start with, if we continue as a European legislator like what we are doing always, then we are not coming forward. So there has to be a kind of a policy change. A policy change is needed. And from my point of view, we have to be more and extremely more ambitious than what we have done so far. We should come up with a better or a more strong political will to survive in a digital world. So far, we are kind of a digital colony. And what we have heard in the last month was, if you're looking to the UN report, 75% is led by the US or the Chinese world in digital matters. And so if we don't want to play a role in this, yes, we can continue what we are doing so far, but if we would like to survive, then we have to come up with a more ambitious way of thinking and a more ambitious way of legislating. We have to be in Europe more self-confident, we have to be more self-determined, and we need more courage, we need a lot of more investments, we need a lot of better legislation, we need a flexible legislation, especially in the digital world. We need a flexible legislator. And at least also we need a real digital single market. So far, when I see what we have done the last 5 years or the last 3 years, we are coming up in this digital single market again and again with directives. And this is something what we have to change from the beginning. We should come up in a digital single market with regulations. And so if you see to the copyright directive, audiovisual media directive, the digital content directive, there we have a common set of rules as a fundament, but then ending up with 27 or 28 different legislations, and therefore I would say we have to change our mindset here in creating a real digital single market. And if we're coming to these privacy matters, of course, we have done here something for the data protection issues, but still sticking to some principles what has been written or thought through in the 80s, and I'm not sure if we should still stick in the same interpretation of these principles and what we have now in the digital world. We have to come up to find in this data triangle between fundamental rights, security, and also innovation, we should come up with a better balanced situation and again being more flexible. If we are looking to the consent, we discussed these at that time already, that the consent, what we are meaning with these at the end, and my thesis today is the consent means the death of privacy. This is always, again, as a member of the CDU, something I would say, yes, this is also harming me in a way, because I consider a consent is always the self-determination of your own life. But if we are looking to the behavior, what we have now also seen, and Mrs. Niedermann, I'm a lawyer, and I know what harm might get out of analyzing of data, but I'm also consenting to every app on my smartphone, and probably I have 100 apps on my smartphone, and I would consider this is a waste of lifetime to read all the terms and conditions and then consenting at the end anyway. That's why probably we have to think differently on these and structure these in a better way. But my discussion at that times when we discussed and negotiated the GDPR, because of the balance for more innovation, could have been also a new data category on pseudonymous data. Of course, we will always discuss this problem of re-identification at the end of personal data, but probably there might be a kind of a way in making this safer for our individuals and our citizens. But we haven't not thought about a new data category, but it would have been necessary and would have been given us a better starting point also for this innovation situation. And even if we are coming to these principles from the 80s, so deleting all data you are not needing any longer, so this means in our digital world now throwing away resources. Also this other principle, using the data only for one purpose. Yeah, what you are doing then if you have the next day another idea of using these personal data. So we don't have answers in the GDPR so far, or the answer is please start again, go back to the starting point and ask for consent. But I'm not sure if this is the situation we should have in a radical changing world where we need more innovation, but on the other hand, of course, also more safeguarding privacy. And that's why we need to think differently on these issues so far. And I would say we have to discuss, Mr. Kallen, what you also mentioned. At first, we have to discuss or to decide. I do think we don't need to discuss too long. We should more decide and then being flexible on the results and coming up with better alternatives at the end and what we have in mind now. But of course, we have to ask ourselves, do we want to play a role still in the world, in the digital world? If we are saying all yes, then we should change our behavior and our mindset, and we shouldn't stay at this status of a digital colony of the Chinese or the North Americans. And the second question is there a kind of a third way for the Europeans compared to the US and the Chinese or Asian way? And how far would we let them go in spying on us, on everything what we have on our computers, on our digital issues, the economy, the privacy, etc., etc., how far we would let them go? And then the other question is how we would like to protect us in a way. And again, there we need this balancing of the data triangle between fundamental rights, innovation, and security. And what we need is this, what I mentioned before, this strong political will, and not discussing for months and months and months. We need now decisions. We need this changing. We need also this competition-orientated thinking, how we can make sure that European players can emerge to a kind of a global player in the digital market. How can we concentrate more on priorities? Probably it's not the best idea to do everything what others have done already. Probably concentrate on new priorities like mobility or health data or whatever it is, but concentrate, and we need more investments, a lot more investments. If I'm considering the situation between Europe and the US, then probably we should invest 10 times more than what we have done now. And even if we... Thanks. And so investments, of course, infrastructure. I can't believe that a high industrial member state like Germany is still discussing or not coming forward with the whole infrastructure in a way where what might be satisfying is its citizens. And we need more research and development here. And of course, also thinking about our democratic structures. If we are still coming up with such a ponderous and slow structures like what we have done, if we are looking to the GDPR, so from the first consultation till the entering into force, 10 years, so you can imagine that this is not the time limits we should still think about. And so that's what I would say, even investing in security might be something to gain more trust for our citizens. This is, in a kind of a short overview, something I would ask you, and I would trying to motivate you to be more ambitious. If we are sitting here still month for month and waiting what the Commission is someone from the Commission here? Please hear my words. Please come or give us a reason to act more quickly. Thanks a lot, and I hope this gives you a good overview.